Oh, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome to Dreamy Dreamland with your Sensei Bob. Here we are in the Holy War that you've all been praying for. I pray for love and peace. Give a listen to this.
Prayed for. They want you to pick a side and each other, but we can always choose peace. The word Israel was first presented in the Bible as a name given to Jacob after he fought an angel. Its meaning was a man who has struggled with God and is commonly translated as God prevails or man seeing God. Many have argued that the word Israel in the Bible does not refer to a place, but rather a believer or a group of believers in God. Others believe the land known as Palestine was where the biblical state of Israel once stood. And in the 17th century, Sabbatai Zevi was the first Jew to try and resettle there. Sabbatai Zevi claimed to be the Messiah and amassed a large Jewish following that engaged in ritual and the defilement of God's law. In the spring of 1666, they were planning to be the first Jewish settlement in Palestine. But things changed when Sabbatai was arrested and thrown in jail. His radical movement continued with the Frankism movement, and Zionism became more political. Although they claimed to be secular, the Zionists flooded the temples with prayers for a return to Zion and a restoration of the Jewish state. But the rabbis rejected them. In 1885, the rabbis wrote that we consider ourselves no longer a nation, but a religious community, and we therefore expect neither a return to Palestine nor a sacrificial worship under the sons of Aaron, nor the restoration of any of the laws. While the rabbis offered no support, the Zionists garnered support of the British Crown as early as 1841, and they were funded by the Rothschild banking dynasty, otherwise known as the Bank of England. So the Crown was likely involved from the start. In 1897, the political intent to recreate the state of Israel was made official to the public, and in 1917, under the British government's Balfour Declaration, British troops seized control of Palestine on behalf of the Zionists. In 1922, the League of Nations adopted the declaration, and in 1947, the United Nations granted parts of Palestine to the Zionists. Between 1947 and 1949, Palestinians were made refugees and kicked out of the homes of their ancestors. Hundreds of villages were destroyed, and thousands of Palestinians were murdered in a series of massacres known as the Nakba. The Zionists killed Palestinian Muslims, Christians, and Jews. The Zionists claimed to be non-religious, but they were mostly Ashkenazi Jews. The Ashkenazi can be traced back to the Khazars, the progenitors of Rabbinic Judaism. The Khazar Khaganate was a major empire in what is now Ukraine, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and parts of Russia, Turkey, and Iran. It was ruled by the Khazars, but made up of several diverse nomadic tribes. In the year 740, the Khazars mass converted to Judaism. Synagogues and schools were built, and Rabbinic Judaism was born. The original Jerusalem Talmud was replaced by the recently codified Babylonian Talmud, which was based on Babylonian philosophy and became the mainstream thanks to the Khazars and the Zionists. Some Christians believe that this is the synagogue of Satan written about in the Bible, which say they are Jews and are not. And many other Christians have become Zionists themselves. The Zionists have tremendous support from American megachurches and Christian evangelicals, many of whom believe that as the world becomes a fiery hell, they will be saved and brought to an eternal paradise. But in order for this to happen, the Temple of Solomon must be rebuilt, and 2/3 of the Jewish people must perish. According to the Bible, King Solomon's temple was constructed in 957 BC and destroyed in 586 BC, rebuilt again in 516 BC, and destroyed again in the year 70 AD. Many Christians and Jews believe that this temple must be rebuilt in order for their Messiah to come. But there is something in its way. Originally built near the end of the 7th century, the Al-Aqsa Mosque is considered one of the 3 holiest sites in Islam. Islam teaches that this is where the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven. The Temple Mount has been occupied by Israel ever since the Six-Day War of 1967, and now it looks like they are ready to complete their mission. This is the holy war that sane people have feared and zealots have prayed for. They want you to pick a side and each other, but we can always choose peace and learn to love our neighbors. The origin of Friday the 13th has its roots in the ongoing holy war, specifically Friday the 13th in October, which is noteworthy, seeing as how a worldwide Islamic jihad has been called for on Friday the 13th in October. The Knights Templar gained wealth and power by fighting as mercenaries for the Catholic Church during the Crusades. Their headquarters was in the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, on Mount Moriah, where Abraham built an altar to sacrifice his son. King Solomon's Temple is a central component of all three Abrahamic religions, and especially in Western occultism. The Templars were officially known as the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, or Templar Knights. Masonic lodges are based on the Temple of Solomon. Kabbalah teaches that the Temple of Solomon represents the metaphysical world and the descending light of the Creator through the Tree of Life. The Templar Knights wore white mantles with a red cross, a symbology that can be found throughout the history of the Catholic Church and its offshoots. The rebuilding of King Solomon's Temple is a crucial goal of many religious groups and secret societies. The Templars were not only expert warriors, they were also pioneers in an early form of banking, and arguably one of the world's first multinational corporations. They acquired land throughout Europe and the Middle East, including the island of Cyprus. They owned and operated several farms and vineyards. They built massive stone cathedrals, and they had their own fleet of ships for war and for the import-export business. When Jerusalem was recaptured by Muslim forces in 1187, the Templars were forced to leave the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount. But they still managed many businesses and wielded much power. King Philip IV was deeply in debt to the Templars and began pressuring the church to take action against them. At dawn on Friday the 13th of October 1307, mass arrests were carried out against the Templars. Claims were made that the Templar recruits were forced to spit on the cross and deny Christ. They were accused of worshiping Baphomet and a mummified head believed to be that of John the Baptist. Dozens of Templars were burned at the stake, and the order was officially dissolved. The Temple Mount remained under control of Muslim forces until the British captured it in the Battle of 1917. 30 years later, the United Nations gave the land surrounding the Temple Mount to the Zionists, and the State of Israel has been encroaching upon it ever since.
Well, that was a nice little primer, give you a little idea of what's going on, a little historical background. Now, don't believe a word I say or anybody else. You should go check all this stuff out for yourself. The internet is quite nice. You can just Google anything, and it'll give you a whole bunch of stuff to look at. And I would say, so you saw me there doing this, right? So that was a prayer. I was praying. Right? And what I was doing was shamanically, energetically praying for everyone's well-being, right? Their health, right? And pretty much where I'm at in my life today, I've done, again, I suggest that you go back and look at all the shows I've done, right? And that they give a great primer, not of just my life and the stories of my life, but those stories, a lot of people go, you're like Forrest Gump. You're always in the right place. Well, no, I am that little feather. The movie starts, right? Bang, right? And we have a train shot that dollies into this plantation, very Mississippi, the oaks with the moss, and the big house with the columns. And the train shot is right here. looking at it, and all you hear is like buzzing of bees and birds and natural sounds, right? And then all of a sudden, silently, a feather floats in from the frame over here, and it kind of goes through the whole frame. And if you watch this movie, you will see that the feather gets a hyper focus. And so, that feather is basically probably computer generated, right? So, which would be very not a problem. So it floats through, and everything else is kind of in focus, but that feather is in hyper focus. And then it goes off the frame. As soon as it does, you hear, and there goes Forrest, and the movie starts. And at the end of after all the Forrest goes through, and he's always right at the right place, right time, and he is going to, at the end of the movie, the bus shows up, and his little boy, his son, who's also known and named as Forrest Gump, sits, gets off the bus, and this kid is rocket science, right? And, talking smart. And he's like, first grade, and, he can read every 7 languages. Anyway, he gets off, he thanks the bus driver, he gets off. His father's there, and his father's kind of sitting on the ground, and so his son sits there on the ground. And so that music that came at the intro comes, and then you see the feather come, and no one says anything. Music's in the background, and then the music kind of stops, and you hear the bees and everything, and the birds, and it goes out, and the music starts, and dolly's back, and you get the credits, right? And so our lives are just like that. They're movies. I mean, I talk a great deal and put things into Hollywood frame or film frame, not just Hollywood, everybody else's movies, right? Because it's the closest thing. If you read autobiography of a yogi, right? This guy, he was ahead of his time, and so he, earliest 20th century, he's kind of discussing what the world is like, and he says it's like a movie, right? And the film, The Matrix, says no, it's kind of like a computer simulation, right? That's kind of where we are. And when you realize that it's a computer simulation, so if you ever play a computer game, single person computer game or a multiplayer, and everybody's on the internet doing something together, The Sims or whatever, right? And that's like what's going on. And so you can have an input, right? You can actually create that sim you want, And so people, like when my car blew up, and it did it in an amazing way, First, it kind of, people have this happen. They didn't put enough water in their radiator, and it overheated. So that's what happened to me. I don't know anything about cars, and so I've been having my car fixed because I only have one car. I can't afford to buy another car. And so, I had a strut fixed because the wheel was about to fall off. That needed to be done, but all the other struts were gone. And the guy said, "Well, you should, fix all those other." So I did. So from March, I spent about $1,800, right? And it goes, "Well, now your car's all set for winter," and that's when my car overheated, right? So I put a couple of jugs of water into it, drove around, and it was fine, right? And there was a problem with my air conditioner, right? And I kept saying, "There's something with the problem with the cooling system." And I said, "Guys, So they replaced the oil. I said, when they did, I said, make sure that all the other fluids are topped off, make sure everything's fine, check everything out really clear, right? And every time they would, put a strut on, I fix this, and I say, look at everything, make sure that everything's great. So from March to like 2 weeks ago, I've had that car in and out of this mechanic's garage 6 times, and I paid him like $1,800. 300 here, 300 there, 200 here, and so. So, I was, after putting water in it, I drove around for another 200 miles. It was fine. And I was coming home from a friend's, and it was raining really hard. And I pulled into my driveway. Well, I pulled into the Forest Service Road, and so I'm like a quarter mile from my home. And all of a sudden, when I'm making that turn, the idiot lights go on, the engine goes, and power steering's no more, brakes no more. But I've already made the turn, so I kind of turn into that road, and I go down maybe, 100 yards, and I kind of roll into the side of the hill very nicely. It comes to a stop, and I call up the guy. He comes, he sends the wrecker, and they take it away, and 2 or 3 days later, said, "Oh, your coolant system." I said, "Isn't that what I was talking about?" He said, "Yeah, but it's cracked, and we can replace it. These 500 plus." And I said, and then everything will be, oh yeah, then your car will be great. And so I do it. I go down there to get the car, and he says, "Oh, your engine is totally toast, right? You can't fix your car. Your car is dead." I said, "What about so what do what?" And he goes, "Yeah, and you owe us $800. I told us $500. Well, the towing charge and the this charge and that. What? So I said, "Okay." And so you gonna do it now? I said, "No, not really. I have no money. You've taken all my money. I have to wait till the next month, and then I'll give you some money." Anyway, so I'm going home, and a friend brought me there, and I'm coming back, and I'm thinking, "Okay, God." So, and God said, "Don't worry about this. I got it covered. You didn't, need that car. And if you do need a car, you'll have one, and you need to have a car, you'll get a better one." I said, "Okay." So, went home, and so I had no way to go anywhere, anyplace. So a week goes by, and my phone, is in those 2 weeks were beautiful. It's like 70s in the day and 50s at night, and starry nights. The moon was down. It was beautiful. And so I basically started to just pray and read the Bible and write. I've been writing a lot. So, and any of you who want to read anything that I write, get a hold of me at the dudawake42@gmail, dudawake42@gmail, and send you something. If anybody wants to put anything in a PayPal, right now I have like, let's see, how much? I have about $20 in my pocket to last until November the 10th. That's okay. I'm really embracing. I have enough food at home. I can eat for at least a year. Right? And things grow on the deep green all year round, even in the winter. There's stuff for me to eat in the forest. So I'm really embracing that. And I have no heat, just my electric blanket. And this morning, I woke up and I was so toasty and nice in my little sleeping bag with my electric blanket over it and another lighter down over that. I was like, yum, right? And I stuck my head out of it and was like, looked at the thermometer, and so the thermometer said it was 38 degrees inside the man cave. And I was wearing, clothes I was wearing yesterday to sleep, and so I just put my shoes on. I went and looked at the thermometer outside, and the thermometer outside said it was 32 degrees, right? But nothing was frozen because the dew point was like a gazillion, right? So I went in and meditated and prayed, and just starting my coffee percolator warmed my little man cave up to about 56, right? More than comfortable, right? So that is going to be my winter, pretty much. And as long as the utilities don't go out, I'll be fine. Otherwise, I'll be, like last Christmas when it was 60 degrees below zero, the electricity did go out. Thank Jesus, thank the Lord, and that was fine, right? Because well, you need a wood stove. No, sorry, the man can't handle a wood stove. And I can't do a wood stove. You've got to cut down trees and split logs or buy it, and I don't have any of the above. Right? Now I can have a fire pit. I can drag logs out from the woods and get them going, and be next to them. I had a nice fire last. I don't know. It wasn't this Saturday. It was the Saturday before. Anyway, but it was nice. And being right next to it, it's toasty and warm. Being 10 feet away, it was warm-ish. Any further, nah. So, and that's my man. That's me in the man cave. That's me in the deep green. And what that does is bring me closer to God. Because I'm right there. God's right there. God's always right there, right? And we get in the way, right? That little primer that I gave you earlier in the YouTube, basically,
strike since Hamas's October 7th surprise attack on southern Israel, which killed more than 1,400 Israelis. The human rights group Defense for Children International Palestine reports Israeli strikes have on average killed one child every 15 minutes in Gaza since fighting escalated. This is Dr. Hassan Abusita, a surgeon in Gaza City who narrowly survived Tuesday's explosion at Al-Ahli Hospital, a blast Palestinians blame on Israel.
40% of all the cases that I've seen have been children. A lot of them have been like this. They've lost one or two parents. And unfortunately, these kids have a long recovery road in front of them.
Earlier today, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak arrived in Tel Aviv, where he was greeted by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Sunak said he believed Israel's military is, quote, taking every precaution to avoid harming civilians. He made no mention of Israel's decision to cut off food, water, fuel, and medicine to Gaza, a siege that's widely considered a breach of international law. On Wednesday, President Joe Biden said Egypt and Israel have agreed to allow 20 humanitarian aid trucks through the Rafah border crossing into Gaza. The trucks aren't expected to arrive until Friday. A spokesperson for the Red Cross and Red Crescent Society said, quote, we're talking about 2 million people who are in need of everything, so 20 trucks will be a drop in the ocean, they said. In the occupied West Bank, health officials say at least 7 Palestinians were killed by Israeli forces and armed settlers over the past day, amidst mounting military raids and arrests. 69 Palestinians have been killed in similar attacks since October 7th. Major protests across the West Bank have also taken aim at the ruling Palestinian Authority, which has launched a violent crackdown on demonstrations. 12-year-old Palestinian girl named Hassan Nasrallah was shot and killed by PA security forces Tuesday during protests in Jenin following the deadly bombing of Gaza's Al-Ahli hospital. The United States has vetoed a UN Security Council resolution calling for a humanitarian pause to Israel's relentless bombardment of Gaza Strip and its 2.4 million inhabitants. The resolution, sponsored by Brazil, called for full, rapid, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access for UN agencies to deliver life-saving aid to the besieged territory. It included a condemnation of Hamas's attacks on Israel and demanded the immediate and unconditional release of hostages. On Wednesday, 12 of the UN Security Council's 15 members voted in favor of a humanitarian pause in Gaza. Russia and UK abstained, while the United States used its privilege as a permanent member of the Security Council to exercise its veto. This is the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas Greenfield.
The United States is disappointed this resolution made no mention of Israel's rights of self-defense.
The United States veto of a humanitarian pause in Gaza came 2 days after the US, France, Japan, and the United Kingdom rejected a Gaza ceasefire resolution proposed by Russia. Palestinian UN Ambassador Riyad Mansour spoke after Wednesday's vote.
It is beyond belief that some still speak of a right to self-defense of an occupying power that has made clear it is seeking blind vengeance, forced transfer, and annihilation of our people.
An Israeli Parliament Ethics Committee has suspended Knesset member Ofer Kassif for 45 days after he criticized Israel's assault on Gaza. The suspension comes as Israeli authorities have arrested more than 100 Israeli citizens over social media posts supporting Palestinians in Gaza. At least 70 Israeli university students face suspension or other disciplinary action for posting pro-Palestinian sentiments online. To see our interview with Ofer Kassif, you can go to democracynow.org. In Washington, D.C., Vermont Independent Senator Bernie Sanders has blocked legislation that would have effectively barred U.S. humanitarian aid from reaching Gaza. On Wednesday, Sanders objected when Florida Republican Senator Rick Scott tried to pass the so-called Stop Taxpayer Funding of Hamas Act.
Right now, there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of innocent men, women, and children in Gaza who have lost their homes. They've been thrown out of their homes. They have no food, they have no water, they have no fuel. And I remind my colleagues that half of those people are children.
Pentagon Chief Lloyd Austin has ordered an additional 2,000 U.S. troops to deploy to the Middle East in support of Israel. The order builds on a rapid response force of 2,000 U.S. Marines sailing for the Eastern Mediterranean, along with 2 U.S. Navy carrier strike groups. This evening, President Biden's giving a primetime address where he's expected to ask Congress for $100 billion in emergency funds to ship more weapons to Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan, and to further militarize the U.S.-Mexico border. Meanwhile, a high-ranking State Department official has resigned in protest of the Biden administration's policies on Israel and Palestine. For 11 years, Josh Paul oversaw arms transfers to U.S. allies while serving as the Congressional and Public Affairs Director of the State Department's Bureau of Political Military Affairs. In a letter explaining his resignation, Paul condemned U.S. what he called blind support for Israel as, quote, an impulsive reaction built on confirmation bias, political convenience, intellectual bankruptcy, and bureaucratic inertia, unquote. Paul wrote his greatest desire was to see both Israelis and Palestinians flourish, adding, quote, collective punishment is an enemy to that desire, whether it involves demolishing one home or 1,000, as 2 is ethnic cleansing, as 2 is occupation, as 2 as apartheid, he wrote. On Capitol Hill, police arrested at least 300 activists Wednesday as they held a nonviolent sit-in protest in the Congressional Cannon Rotunda to demand lawmakers press for a ceasefire in Gaza. The arrest came as thousands of people rallied on the National Mall for a demonstration organized by the groups If Not Now and Jewish Voice for Peace. Organizers called it the largest ever protest of Jews' support of Palestinians. Among those addressing the crowd was award-winning author Naomi Klein.
Friends, these are the darkest days that I have ever experienced. The Israeli government, with the full support of every Western power in the world, announced an intent to commit genocide using Jewish fears of another genocide as the excuse. And now it is in the process of making good on that threat. That is what we must stop. That is what we are here to stop. That is what we will stop. There are so many more lives to save.
Later in the broadcast, we'll hear more voices from the Jewish Voice for Peace rally in D.C.
Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, hallowed be thy name. Thy will be done, hallowed be thy name. As it was in heaven, is now, ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Hallowed be thy name. When you say hallowed be thy name, it's part of the Ten Commandments. Don't use the Lord's name in vain, right? So hallowed be thy name is giving hallowed meanings the most sacred, meaning most honored, most connected, right? So you're saying, I am hallowed be thy name. I am offering myself as an offering, right? A blood offering, right? And I, in every day and every way, will take the piece of the earth and make it strong in your name. Hallowed be thy name. And when Muslims say Allah Akbar, they're basically saying the same thing. When Christians say Amen, they're basically saying Allah Akbar. Basically, Jews, Christians, and Muslims are cousins in the Abrahamic tradition. Hallowed be thy name. And what we're seeing is an end of times. It's just a continuation of the same scale, right? About 4 years ago, I started talking about the big splash, right? And that's what we're experiencing, and we are rushing headlong into becoming the Star Trek Federation. And if you had watched any of Star Trek, probably one of the better episodes of all of the Star Treks was the beginning, the trial run of Next Generation, when we meet all the characters, right? And they're at this place, Fire Point Station. And that means they're right on the edge, meaning further out from that solar system, no one from there, and the known universe is gone, right? And so they're right on the edge, right? And they're at this place, and there's all this politics going on, and the Federation is just happy to get a toehold there, get it's just like us, bringing in NATO, and it's just like Ukraine, right? So they're scared to see something coming from the unknown, and so to protect their new little toehold, the Enterprise zips out of orbit and heads towards the oncoming unknown, right? And they bump into Q, right? And Q brings them, Q is like a god, it can throw them, and he does. He throws them a zillion light years from where they were, like physically impossible, like in a snap of the fingers. Now, he does everything with a snap of the fingers. And when he does that, there's a little like coming from the snap of the fingers, and then it happens, right? And so he basically says, "Hey, boys," he brings them to a place where they bump into the Borg. "We will assimilate you," and they go, "Bing," and sing, they're out of the way. And then he shows everyone in the Enterprise who and what they are, where they came from, what it was about. And so that was the the issue, and one of the great scenes is Lisa. Um, that's one of the great scenes of it because they go to like a scene right where we are now, right where the whole world, Earth has like gone into total disarray, war, and not everyone's dead. It's not a burned out center. It's just really like back, to the 7th century of the Dark Ages, but with machine guns. And so I would suggest you go watch them. And what's quite interesting is Roddenberry, before he had this job, he was in naval intelligence, right? And then he got out of the military in the late 40s or mid 50s, and he started to write in Hollywood. As like the guy who makes up the script when they don't have anything, they got to shoot it like that day. So he was doing that. He was doing it for Gunsmoke and Paladin and all kinds of shows. And so he came up with this idea of wagon train in space. That's how he pitched it. And he went to Lucille Ball, who owned Paramount at the time, right? Because Lucy and Desi took their money from the Lucy show because they produced it themselves. CBS didn't own it. They were the most popular, so they made a lot of money. And so and they were making a lot of money on the reruns. And so they bought Paramount when Paramount was like in the dirt, right? And so Lucy was a smart business person, right? And I mean, she and Desi were a great team in a business sense. And when the sparks were flying in the sex sense too. That story is quite interesting. And so Roddenberry pitches it to Lucy. Lucy gives it the green light. And they started, and it would have gotten a green light anyway. And look who picked it up: NBC, biggest military industrial, and NBC has been the harbinger of social things because Ronald Reagan, when he was just an actor and president of Actors Guild and wasn't really doing movies, General Electric gave him 20 team mule borax, and it was a TV show that had different stories, and he would introduce it kind of like Rod Serling in the Twilight, and that's where Ronald Reagan got his chops in a social political sense, right? And he got his political chops first being in the Communist Party in the 20s, then getting into Screen Actors Guild politics and unions, and he was a liberal Democrat. Ronnie had no real ideology. He just followed what his handlers told him to do. And at certain points, being the Aquarian that he was, he did things that when he and Mikhail Gorbachev came from the back of that boat and said, "Hey, we worked it all out. We're getting rid of all nuclear weapons." What? And they did, basically. Right? All of those treaties, START, ABM, you name it, they reined in nuclear war, right? And now it's been let go. Donald Trump, stepped away from all those treaties, and after 2 years, Russia saying, "Well, why don't we get back to this?" But they didn't want to spend the limited money they had on nuclear weapons. And Gorbachev said, "Screw it," because his handlers, who are the same handlers as Joe Biden and Obama and Donald Trump and every other politician, the cue ball up there in Canada, stand-up comedian in Ukraine, because he was ready to make a deal with Russia. That would have been fine. Okay, we won't ever join NATO, and you can have that Donbass stuff, and we will have the rest, and we'll kind of join the EU. That was the deal. Everyone will be able to drive Audis and have a good time. And we stepped in and said, not. Carrot Head Boris Yeltsin went over there and said, "Nope." So that was, and JoJo, came out of nowhere and became president. I mean, here's a guy who couldn't even stand up to Kamala Harris, being, and debate, and his eye blew up, right? You know, the little device he had put there so he could see what his handlers wanted to say, and that was it. Say no more, do no more. So that's kind of the storyline, and we are heading towards this fake catastrophe. Now, nuclear weapons will be thrown around. I'm sure that a nuclear weapon will be released, or a nuclear catastrophe will be released. Those reactors will be hit and will be worse than a nuclear weapon, right? It'll contaminate all of the Baltic states and a good chunk of Russia, and it'll be probably worse than. I mean, it's a toss-up because the when Chernobyl. See, the problem with Chernobyl was it wasn't a water-mediated reactor. It was like ancient technology, and so they used carbon. Right? It was a copy of Fermi's. Fermi built a nuclear reactor in a squash court in Chicago, University, with no protecting buildings. Meaning, if something went wrong, there was nothing to protect all of Illinois and Chicago from catastrophe. And they had enough piece of material because they were cooking that sucker. Their real experiment was to see, they knew they could make a sustained chain reaction, but they wanted to see if they could make plutonium. Oh, no problem, Lisa. You're a busy girl. Well, at least hit this one too. So there will be a a real catastrophe. A lot of people will die in Europe, not just Ukrainians. Like right now, maybe 500,000 people have died in this Ukrainian war. Maybe 200,000 Russians, maybe 300,000 Ukrainians, right? And it's been but it's been a totally orchestrated, scripted event. And the Ukrainians have started to realize the story, right? And so, because if we had given the Ukrainians, we've given the Ukrainians the ATACMS, which are a longer range version of the HIMARS, right? Very accurate, can hit like a card table 300 miles away. Well, we gave them the medium range ATACMS, about 150 miles, right? They have one that goes 600 miles, so that could hit anything in Crimea and anything in Russia. Not quite Moscow, but everything along the border. They call the military, transportation zones, and they can almost do that, right? I mean, they can reach into anywhere in eastern Ukraine, right? Except, it's just not quite able to hit the. But if the Ukrainians are tricky people, they could, twig up the ATACMS to be as strong. Or let's see, if we have given them the ATACMS right off the bat, we could have hit the Russians everywhere and anywhere, and they wouldn't have been able to build that big fortress line, period. But we didn't. We knew, these aren't like, oops, we should have given it to them. We didn't think about it. No. These guys know everything. It's all scripted, right? And so the Ukrainians are realizing, so they're using the weapons. They're blowing through everything we give them, and everything that they don't sell on the black market. They're blowing through everything because they don't want to throw their people. But now the Russians have been throwing people at the problem, not technology and armaments, because they're running out of. Even though they got more stuff from World War II than you can think of, it's still problematic. So they're throwing people at it. So Russia's actually throwing people at the Ukraine war, and Ukrainians are being death averse. They're not just after that little stalemate they had in that city, and they lost, like 60,000 guys in 3 months, they said, oh, we're not doing that again. So they're standing at bay, and so that's why they were given the anti-tanks. So now they can go at anything in eastern Ukraine, and if we give them enough, they can just, be far enough back where the Russians can't touch them. Now it's pretty easy for the Russians to throw cruise missiles at Ukrainian cities because it doesn't matter. They don't have to be accurate. They just have to get to that city, right? And so, and all we would have to do to protect, and I don't know why the Ukrainians haven't done this themselves, but during World War II, when London was being obliterated, what they did, they put up what are known as barrier balloons. They put up big balloons with cables between them, and so the airplanes would fly into them, and so it was hard for the Germans to bomb. So that's why they shot the B-2 at them, because it would go way high up and come straight down, right? A ballistic missile. But militarily and any otherwise, it wasn't really. It blew things up, but it did make a difference, right? Now the B-1, which was the first cruise missile, the motor was a air intake. It wasn't a turbine thing. It just explosion, right? And so the reason why it closed was these little veins would close, explosion, open up, explosion. It was almost an internal combustion engine. And so, it was, but instead of moving wheels, it was putting thrust out the pipe. And so, so now you got a little rest. So, but it would make a buzz sound, because it would have that explosion in that chamber, 40, 50 times a minute. So, that was the explosion, right? And so you could hear it coming. So it was almost a terror weapon because we were going, as long as you heard going, it was, and that's what I call it, the buzz bomb. It was, you knew that, but as soon as if you heard, and then it stopped. So, it could hit. If you could hear it and then it stopped, meaning that thing, because it just stopped. So it just did this. The wings shot off, and it became a projectile. So, we humans have this amazing ability to think of the most deadly stuff. Instead of putting all that money and intellect and industrial might into bringing, bounty. Look, we've dumped $160 billion into the Ukraine in less than 2 years. Right now, if we had done that, we could have that $160 billion could buy medical care, education, food, and housing for everyone in America for the next 20 years. And if you put half of it into a trust that made interest, that would be it. That's what the Social Security does, right? And security ain't going anywhere. It's called Social Security insurance for a reason. As you work, you put that money in there. It's an insurance policy. That's why they have a hard time. It's like, why is the post office went bankrupt? Because the little insurance policy for their workers and for the post office itself was not protected like Social Security is. And it basically, the Congress raided it and took all the money and spent it on other stuff. Right? So, and if you wanted to cut crime, drug addiction, and push up the GDP, and you're going to have to, if you're going to bring all industry back to America, which they're doing. And they're not just America, they're bringing it to NAFTA. And see, people don't realize NAFTA, especially the NAFTA that, Carrot Head rejiggered, Trump rejiggered, makes Canada and Mexico part of the United States. It's all one country. Didn't know that, did you? Didn't know NAFTA made those three. So it's the biggest industrial and economic bloc in the world, right? And it can feed itself. It's self-sustaining. They have the resources, they have the workers, etc. The hardest working, most productive workers in the world are the Mexicans right in that 200-mile square area that makes all the parts for cars, right? And those parts go and come across our border 10, 15 times every day, you know. And we send people back and forth every day. And we are, one of the major reasons why we're having inflation is that we don't have enough workers to work at McDonald's. So let those people in to work at McDonald's. And that's what we used to do up until Ronald Reagan. And then, George H. basically gave everyone amnesties, started DACA, did all these things to level the playing field, and our economy took off. And Bill Clinton took that and really hit it out of the park. Bill Clinton, the end of, and Al Gore and W were fighting out to be who's going to be president, and then Florida decided, so did the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, that's when we should have said, we need to do something about the Supreme Court, right? But not really. So, I mean, this stuff is right in your face, kids. You don't need me to tell you. Whether you like me telling you stories like this and don't believe a word I say, And thank you to the handful of you that have put something in PayPal. It still is working. So why don't you put something in PayPal right now, right? And it's not like scary. If you have a debit card, you can put it in there, right? And I have no money in my accounts, so I don't worry that someone's going to steal money from me. I don't have, good luck with that, If you take $20 from my checking account, so no one's bothering with that. And on the other side of the coin, the hidden hand wants me to do this. I am what is known as loyal opposition. I'm not looking to any of those morons. I don't want their job. Many times in my life, I could have signed on to become part of the club and be one of those guys. I could have been Bremer. I could have been any one of those chuckleheads. But I can't. I wouldn't do it. I talk to God enough to know that that's not what God wants me to do. So, and if you don't do what God wants you to do, that's the sin. That's the major sin. That's the big sin. The other 10 are just like guide rails. Don't kill anyone. Right? But if you have to, go ahead. But not really. I mean, I've sworn on to the 10 Commandments, meaning I'm in a situation, and I did. When I was a conflict resolution officer, the New York City Housing Authority, that doesn't exist anymore, at least the police department doesn't. Everything's New York Police Department. Subway cops, housing cops, they're all not a good idea. Budgetary, and the reason they did that is that they were so broke that New York City went from having 30,000 cops to having 17,000. Right? And that's why in the 1970s and 80s crime was so bad. There were no cops, so they absorbed the subway cops and the housing cops, and that boosted up their ranks. But then they didn't have those ranks in the subways, and that's why subways became the pestilence it is, and that's why the housing became. And in housing, they wanted to. They did it to the subways because they wanted to get rid of it. They didn't need it anymore. No one tried it. New York City is less and less a manufacturing town, and that's why the subways were built, to move the workers from their crappy houses in Brooklyn to their factories in New York. And that's what Soho was. It was a gigantic factory area. That's what 8th Avenue was, and still kind of is with the garment district. These things are very obvious. They aren't invisible. What's interesting, when people go on and on, the kids, they're learning really terrible things in high school and college. They are, but no worse than they ever have. So, So really, only one thumbs up. Come on, let's have some more. There's how many of you there watching? 2. Come on, and let's have some comments. Ones that are kind of ask me a question. Let's that they call this a live chat. We're supposed to have a discourse in this. How long have I been doing this now? Almost an hour, 55 minutes. So anyway, so I was a conflict resolution officer, right? And basically what happened, I helped start a housing. I came back from Ireland in 1980, and New York was like just totally a mess, right? And there were thousands of people living on the streets, and not just drug tweakers and prostitutes, but mommies with kids were living in cardboard boxes. And there were 1 million abandoned apartments. That with the oil embargo, all the low-end landlords just walked away from the buildings. They were making money on Section 8 housing, but they had to pay for the heat. And when it cost them $300 to heat their building in winter, then it went to $3,000. They just walked away. So the state, the city had to take the buildings. They were no longer private property. Let's see. Scary today. Gray. Yep. Well, it's no more scarier today, Jane, than it was. I mean, it was way scarier in the 70s and 80s. I mean, we put Persian missiles. We put 1,000 Persian missiles all along the eastern border of NATO that could, launch and hit anywhere in Russia within a minute. So that, we couldn't be any more closer to total nuclear annihilation. And that's why Mikhail Gorbachev and, Ronald Reagan did what they did, And so, good on. So, and we're still here. So it's like there will be nuclear hiccups in the next 2 or 3 years. There will be a thing that will wipe, at least a third of the world's population. By 2030, instead of being at 10 billion people, will be about 4 billion. Don't believe a word I say. And the other interesting thing, if that little, what they call the Caribbean train, which is these little vortexes that are up there, above Maine, kind of towards Canada and Newfoundland, there are these like little tornadoes in the ocean that are swirling, and they suck all the warm water from Africa across the Pacific, up the side of South America, through, the Gulf of Mexico, and then up our East Coast, and then over to Ireland, England, and then into countries like Germany and Russia and Poland. And if they stop, and what would stop them? Right there, it's a mixture of warm water, cold water, and really salty water. And as those ice sheets are melting, that's super non-salty water, really, really, really pure H2O. Cold, cold, cold. And when that comes down and mixes in, it will stop those little tornadoes in that part of the North Sea. And when that stops, the warmth of Africa will no longer come across the Pacific, no longer come up, South America, no longer go through. So basically, Maine will be Texas will be turned into Maine, and everything above, east of, Louisiana will turn into the North Pole. I mean, frozen, even in the summertime, frozen, right? Go watch, Art Bell's and Whitley Strieber's movie, The Day After Tomorrow. They wrote it. They wrote the book, and then the book was made into a movie. Very good movie. It was kind of made, I think, in the 70s or late 70s, early 80s. really. So it's forget about global warming. It's the Earth has been. I mean, right now we're in the Goldilocks period, right? And this has only been around for 20,000, maybe a million years, if that. And because Earth kind of bounced back and forth between being a frozen ice ball or being Venus, right? And so, and our moon, our moon. What is it with the moon? Everything about it is like what? I mean, it stays in the same place. No other moon of any other planet does what our moon does, right? Because it's an artificial satellite. The Death Star in Star Wars, that's our moon. It has a fluctuating gravitational field. All the other planets don't. All the other moons don't. That's why it's tricky to land something on the moon. That's why we never went back, because it's tricky. And the technology we used for Apollo, we didn't want it to get out. Because then everything would have changed, because they were using Star Trek technology. The only way those astronauts went from the Earth to the moon without getting barbecued by the sun was they had a force field around the vehicle going from Earth to the moon. Right? How come you look at the taking off of the LEM from the moon when they left? Right? You wouldn't see it had a rocket engine. You would see something coming out that tailpipe, right? At the least, you'd see the little waves of heat. Because man, when they used their little steering jets, you saw stuff coming out of those, but not this big engine that lifted the LEM off the moon, right? Because all you saw was like breaking the stuff, right? The explosion bolts, and that little capsule took over from the LEM. So, and after the second or third landing on the moon, they brought their own car. They brought their own Buick. So they could bring anything they wanted to. Let's see. Someone seemed to say something here. Let's see what they say. Yes. Day after tomorrow. Scary. Jack Black on. Save 13. Yep. Mm-hmm. So, and Apollo 13 was basically, if not attacked, it was, what do you call it when you plant a bomb on something? You know, that, game to it was the 13th, lucky 13. And to give enough reason why, we almost lost those guys, so let's just finish up. I mean, we had paid for enough moon landings to be up through Apollo 21. We stopped at 17. And at 18, 19, 20, 21, they were going to send other Saturn V's up. Instead of when all the stuff that took people, they were going to send like a delivery truck of stuff that was going to be up there that could be taken down and turned into a habitat. And they had it all set. They had paid for it, but they stopped at 17 and moved to the shuttle, which was a Nazi 1940s technology. So anyway, so so we started this housing authority. We took over 50 buildings. We housed 500 families. One of the families is that Hispanic princess. She's probably in her 30s or 40s now, who is now doing the Star Wars character on on a platform on the internet, right? Most popular. What's her name? Her mom. But she was one of the little kids in a cardboard box. You know, if you go back and see when she started making movies, like she was in Men in Black, she was in that Runaway Train movie. She was in a lot of movies. Oh, what's her name? But she was one of the little kids who helped me grow vegetables in the back of her house. You know, she went to our school. We started a school because there was no school there for the kids, so we started a school. We took over PS 22, and we kind of turned it into a art STEM facility. We taught everything through art, right? And so these kids learn math and science and reading far better than what they how they teach now, right? And so, if we really wanted to up our game in our country, we would have, you know, pre-K. You know, kids should be at school learning amongst their peers, not in a ritualized kind of way, but in a way that by the time they hit kindergarten, they can read, know their numbers, and write. And when you do that, the numbers, I did a lot of research. I got paid a lot of money to do research on this. We had this thing called the STAR program. That's what we did. And then when we went into really terrible schools, what we did was we took that one kid who was a real disruptor, we took him out and gave him the care and the consideration and the presence of someone helping them to become all they can be. Right? That's the reason why they usually at disruptor kids, because he's the smartest one there. She's the smartest one there. And so anyway, that's what we did. And so we were so successful. And the city and the developers and everybody and his brother tried to stop us to the point they couldn't. I put legal electricity in all the buildings. So when the marshal came, everyone in their own little house had an electric bill, which is like the gold standard of I live here, right? And so they couldn't get thrown out legally, right? So then and this is what police really are. The police were, certain groups of police were paid by the rich people to just harass and beat up, and everyone there, kind of like what has been going on in Gaza for the last 30 years, right? And so, and what did we do? The guys who were the anarchists, we should attack the police. No, we can't attack the police. They have guns, they have tanks, they have, bombers. No. What we did was we read them poetry. And every time they would come, we would just be out there and entertain them. And they would stop, listen to poetry. It took us 8 months to do this, but we read and performed art and poetry for all the police in New York City, not all at once, but, over 6 months, one by one, and individually went to them and talked to them to the point that they refused to beat us up anymore. And then they took us to court. We went to the Supreme Court twice and won, right? And so at a certain point, the city came to us, okay, listen, we actually have an entity that does exactly what you do. And we started it during the Depression. And since 1932, when we started it, we've only done one building. Now, you guys have been doing this for the last 4 years. You've done 50 buildings. Why don't you just take over our organization? Then you're part of the city. Then everything, we can fund you. And I said, sure, that sounds like a win-win to me. And we did that because Carrie Shea, the most powerful political entity in New York State, if not the United States, was on our side. That's why we won in court. She went and got really good lawyers for us. Right? So, at that point, when we did that, said, well, we need some of your people to be part of some of our people, and da-da-da. So nobody wanted to do it. So I was that guy. I was the diplomat of the crew, the scientist of the crew, the guy who was, collecting data. So I did. And so they said, okay, I thought I would be, a data guy.
They got a bunch of.
Does that fit you? Is that your size?
Almost. I'll grow into it. That sounds longer, but I can't read it.
I so I said okay. So I showed up, and they said, from your background, what you would be is a really good conflict resolution officer. And I said, what? So they sent me off to their academy, and I'd learned how to shoot a gun by J.P. Hoagland's family and the mob. And so when they took me down to the range, and I could shoot better than anybody there, and I could take the gun apart and put it back together, they said, okay, you're good enough. And then, I went to other trainings, and they said, well, you could teach this. Okay, next. And so when I, after about 3 weeks of back training, they said, okay, you're highly trained. So we're gonna put you in the zone that's kind of near one of your housing groups, and here's your partner. And it was this woman who had just left the U.S. Army, and she was the first woman ever to pass the Army Ranger program. And she was an Army Ranger, and she was so good, such badass, that everyone was scared of her. So they made her a master sergeant in the training, right? And she was too badass for that job. So she, after about 20 years in, she retired, and she was, not quite 40, and she was a good-looking babe. But when she was teched out, she looked like the angel of death. And so we would go to court every now and then and have to, give testimony. And every time we went through, we couldn't carry weapons. New York City police could, but we couldn't. And so we'd have to stand. I was always, pair of shorts, a Hawaiian shirt, and my little bow arrow with my picture on it saying that I was a New York City Housing Authority police officer. I wore that just so no cop would shoot me, right? And I would hold, hey, I'm one of you. And I would be the first through the door. But, I would usually carry a six-pack. And my partner would be outside. And so we were in the two housing blocks, that each block had maybe 3 to 6 buildings, and those two had about 16,000 people. So there were 2 police officers for 16,000 people. Now they were like, it was like being in jail. So everyone in those blocks knew us, and my partner, she was a great basketball player. She could outplay basketball with these young kids when she had like 60 pounds of tech on her, right? And she could stand middle court and just keep laying, putting them in the basket. She was amazing, right? So it was her and me, and I would be over there, and these blocks were really nice because they kind of were built on a piece of property that had been a garbage dump. But they kind of back in the 20s built these things. They were about 15 stories high, but they had a lot of trees, a lot of swings, and nice little concrete tables that had chessboard, checkerboards on them. Old guys would be playing chess, checkers, or dominoes. It was really nice. And we put hibachis in there so everyone could grill outside in the summer when it's too hot to cook inside. These are simple things. But when stuff would hit the fan, we would respond. Like I said, I'd be the first through the door. So what's the problem? Okay, talk to me. Tell me what it is. Let's hear. And if things didn't go right, everyone knew that if I went out that door, my partner was coming in, and she would either put everyone in the hospital or kill everyone, right? And behind her was the SWAT team. The SWAT team was scared of her, so she'd be the first in. And about 6 different times we had to assert to that. And 2 of those times I got shot. Right? And as soon as I got shot, she loved me. Right? Second time I got shot was after my third wife died, and I had to. She realized that what I was doing was trying to kill myself. I wasn't going to kill myself, but I put myself in situations that I could die relatively easy. And God didn't want me to die. I mean, I got shot in my hand. I blew my palm. They blew my palm off. And the other one, I got shot but the bullet went sideways, didn't hit a rib, didn't hit anything, just kind of went through my fascia. And I was wearing a white T-shirt, so I did bleed a bit, but it was mostly fascia goo. It looked messy on my T-shirt. It looked like I was going to die. Ooh, she wasn't. All the people in that place had to be taken out on stretchers except for her. And so anyway, so my experience with violence, I made a vow early on, once I was trained, when I was in a shamanic, I went up to Vermont and helped build a Japanese Shinto temple, a Hambu, and teach healing and peace and love. And I was put through the monk training, and monks were trained in martial arts. So I learned jujitsu and tai chi and qigong and aikido, right? And so I can protect myself relatively even today, right? But when I did that, so I was a monk, and once you get to be a certain level of monkdom in Shinto, you take certain vows, and one was never to be violent. And violent means to hurt someone. Now you could intervene and stop people from hurting other people, but you weren't going to really hurt them, right? And you might, disable them for a moment. I mean, I know about 40 different pressure points in your body that if I push them, you go unconscious. Like Vulcan death grip. It's really anyway. So I've been through so much that I'm not scared of anything because I have a conscious intent. I am and conscious awareness. I see the stuff coming 3 blocks away, so I'm prepared. Come on, there's only one thumbs up. All of this isn't worth more than a few more thumbs up. It's like at least 3. How many are watching? 3. 3 of you guys are watching. Come on, let's have a couple more thumbs up. And the majority of you who are going to watch this are going to watch it later. That's I've turned into wallpaper, and that's fine. But come on, let's have something in the PayPal, please. dudewake42@gmail. And if you drop me a line on my email, the dudewake42@gmail, I'll send you some of my stories, some of my novels, some of my essays, some of my insights. And I don't know what it is. The first 3 years, I used to have at least $100 every month on PayPal, which was really, I couldn't depend on it, but at best, $100. Mostly somewhere between $20 and $40, which is better than nothing. Since Thanksgiving, only 3 people have put something in, and it's Thanksgiving is it'll be a year, and there are a lot of you who have a lot of money who watch this. To the point, if you're, I can't use PayPal, they'll steal money out of my account. Okay, well, start another account somewhere and put money in that, and they take money from that and send it to me on the PayPal. And then all they can take is whatever money's in that account, right? Anyway, but it doesn't matter because I'm fine, right? And when I'm dead, I'll be dead. I won't, your Sensei Al-Bob's spirit will still be with you, but this corporeal bag of water won't. Right? And I know I have nothing to do with it. I'm doing my best to keep me. I lost 240 pounds. I've changed my blood chemistry sideways, to much better than what it was. Talking about that, let's see what time it is. I have to go to my doctor's. Yeah. So I'm going to say goodbye. Bye.